Life as an expat. It's a pretty interesting topic, and it's kind of a hard one to really say this is what it is about. But I guess generally, the biggest kind of obstacles slash sources of learning, experience, etc., when it comes to changing countries are going to be the differences in culture and language. And those two are actually very, very, very deeply connected in a way that almost kind of um, escapes your awareness and until you gain a little bit of experience in a different culture and language. So I think the experience is going to vary a lot for people, depending on where you're from and where you move to. In my case, from America to Japan, it's pretty hard to do, a move like that would be any more different. I suppose if you were to go from, just moving from west to east is going to be pretty extreme. Quite a jump across the scale. So, I mean, most people are pretty familiar with Japan, historically, geographically. It's pretty isolated. It has absorbed and imported a lot of culture, particularly from China, and which and China also has been this recipient of other traditions and ways from both within their own country and from outside India and whatnot. Um, so there's always a flow happening between cultures and countries, and geography has always played a pretty big role in that until recently. Nowadays we can fly across the oceans, and we have these huge ships that can bring just about anything from anywhere to just about anywhere. So it's not a big deal anymore. But for most of human history, it was a really big deal to up and cross an ocean. So because of that, Japan has kind of evolved in its own way. And another thing is that the Japanese are very much able to kind of pick and choose what they adopted and what they didn't. Being an island, they don't share any borders with any other nations, and they were also pretty warlike internally as well among themselves, and then also with other countries. So it's a pretty hardcore place. It's pretty intense, and it has a culture that has been forged over many centuries through all of that. And so it's a pretty interesting experience to kind of witness that happening around you. You can really see in things like the architecture and the way the cities are laid out, how old these forces really are. And when you get familiar with the language, you can really feel in a different way where things came from and why they are the way they are. And it also makes you look at your culture also, and kind of think about what culture is. I mean, it's not really the work of any one person, and it's also not an accident. It's this weird kind of congruence of time and all kinds of different forces and ideas, geography. I mean, it's pretty hard to isolate anything that doesn't have some kind of an effect on culture. And American culture is just as interesting in its own way, and just as creative and just as unique as Japanese culture. But just the sheer variety of the way people think and the way they express their thoughts through all the different languages we have, that becomes very apparent as you kind of spend more time away from your own country. So it can really throw you off. On the one hand, it completely uproots your life and removes a lot of opportunities and chances you would have had in your own country. That was one of my first thoughts when I moved over here. In the first few months, it took me a while to find a job. I had no language ability and no social contact either, so I ended up thinking quite a bit, just riding my bicycle around, and, and I started to realize, I'd spent at that time 25 years, all of my life, in a completely different part of the world, completely different culture, completely different lineage of DNA even. I mean, there's a massive difference in even the way I appear compared to the people here. And I also started to realize all the skills, like my language ability and social abilities and experiences, as effective and applicable as they were back home. I was kind of now in this new world, where I was basically a big baby. I mean, in terms of functionality, I couldn't really do much for myself at all. So I guess that's a position of pretty extreme vulnerability. Although I did have my family, my wife, to help me through things. It wasn't like I was trying to figure it out, wandering around. But it did kind of feel that way. As it would, for anyone who's had everything familiar kind of removed, and then one day you just wake up and there you are. So anyways, it is challenging, and if you're going to be doing it long term, you are likely to face some realizations about people and life in general, that might be a little more difficult to kind of see if you were back home. I mean, I'm not trying to say there's any kind of special wisdom in leaving your home. It is a good experience. I would recommend it, at least temporarily, for anyone. You don't even have to really leave your country. Even just moving to a different part of your country or a different city can teach you a lot about yourself and the world around you. It's a pretty fascinating place. From what I've seen anyways. I haven't traveled a ton, but I would like to more in the future. But in the case of Japan, because it is so very Japanese and such a homogenous culture, and everyone here is so, well, most people I should say, are so socialized by the culture to a degree that's a lot kind of more explicit and encouraged than it is back home. American culture is much more, I would say, individualistic and open and based on exchange of ideas, and there's more of a sense of kind of exploration and newness to the place. Japan is a little bit different, and the culture here seems more based on kind of history and what has worked for a really long time, and kind of a lot of it is geared towards face, having face, saving face, maintaining face, which is, I've heard, pretty common for this part of the world. And there's a lot of influences from kind of Confucian thinking, and again, a lot came over from China. And it's much more group-oriented than America. And then on top of that, you got everyone looks Japanese, and that's pretty hard to pull off unless you are Japanese. So it's going to make you feel, I guess, somewhat out of place, or definitely hyper-aware of everyone around you as, looking different, which, again, it's not always a bad thing. It can be a good thing, diversity and whatnot. But I think the real issue is, if you're going to stay here a long time, you start to realize, like, yeah, I'm never going to be Japanese. I'm never going to be a full insider. Not to say that there's anything to be missed by not, being part of the team. But I would say the majority of human beings do need a sense of belonging and kind of acceptance, and they have a need to kind of identify with their culture and their environment. Even in America, as individualistic as we may come across, when everyone's, an individual, there's a kind of a group identification with that, where we feel like, yeah, we're each our own person, etc. And it's just, I guess, just a fundamental kind of need for socialization and sameness that keeps a lot of people going psychologically. There's always exceptions, but that element is a little harder to maintain here. Um, so it's something to be considered, I suppose, and actually something I never even thought about before I came here. It's kind of funny, and again, that was because of my background. I was born and raised in a pretty diverse liberal area, and I didn't think much of, seeing people who didn't look like me, or didn't have the same background, or didn't think like me, or spoke different languages. It was all pretty normal. Here, it's not, and you will bring over a lot of your own socializations and perceptions and elements in your mind that have been bestowed and conditioned by your culture, and you probably will not have noticed them until you get over here, and then they kind of light up like neon. So you're like, wow. Some people handle it differently. Some people find it very, very frustrating to be more or less kind of corralled by a different culture. Some people, they just realize, like, yeah, I guess I'm not the center of the universe and all that, and they kind of accept it. And there's always a mix, So, yeah, it is a challenge. It is a learning experience. Is it a good experience or a bad experience? I suppose that depends on you, your character, and how you handle things in general. But either way, yeah, it's definitely something of an adventure to live abroad. Although you're going to face the same issues that plague all human beings. The whole birth, sickness, old age, death, as the Buddha said, and everything in between in terms of learning and growing in this short life, of which most of us know nothing about what came before or what's coming after. So it's kind of helpful to keep that in mind, like, slow down, don't get too involved, don't get too attached to what's happening, be it good or bad. You really don't know that much about it anyways, and it's going to be gone rather quickly. So that kind of thinking personally has helped me a lot in just being able to adjust and move forward, and I suppose forgive and forget. And forgetting can actually be a very, very useful skill. That's probably been my biggest realization over the past couple of years. So anyways, I've gone on long enough. There it is. Life as an expat. In Japan, of all places.